The first day I came back from the dead, my wife nearly split my skull with a cleaver. She thought I was trying to force myself on her again. In my last life, I was a complete piece of trash. I favored sons over daughters, beat my wife, gambled, and drove my own daughter back to her mother's house. The night I died, she didn't shed a single tear. But now I was alive again, and I gained a knack for sniffing out prey. I chipped through ice to catch fish, set snares for chickens, and traded the last few grains of grain for meat. That evening, I held out a bowl of fish soup to her. She stared at it for a full 10 seconds without taking it. I said, "Drink it. When you're done, we'll go bring our daughter home." Her hand trembled. I woke up. The sensation of being shoved away still lingered on my chest, and those words echoed in my ears. "Satisfied now? If you're satisfied, then just get on down." Before my eyes was a low ceiling, windows papered over with newspaper, mottled light and shadow falling across the packed dirt floor. Walls of mud and straw, riddled with cracks, a faded cloth bag hanging in the corner. The air smelled of cooking smoke and the raw scent of earth. This was home from over 20 years ago. I had been reborn. I, Chunlu, a man who died drowning in endless regret, have now returned to a time over 20 years ago. On the heated brick bed, my wife Song Yakin lay curled up, the quilt clutched tightly in her hands, without a stitch of clothing. Her whole body covered with wounds and bruises, her face bearing nothing but numbness, the light in her eyes snuffed out. Her snow-white legs were all streaked with blood. I buried my face in my hands, tears leaking through my fingers. In my past life, I prized sons over daughters. Just because she gave birth to a girl, I called the child a money-losing burden. After that, I went completely to ruin, did no farm work, just guzzled liquor every day. My father-in-law pulled strings to get me into a livestock farm, but I was fired after just 3 days on the job. I went on drinking binges with my no-good friends, picked up gambling, and gambled away every last bit of the family's money. When I came home, I turned violent, beat her, cursed our daughter. I pushed her so far she sent our daughter back to her parents' home, and the two of them saw each other only a few times a year. She couldn't stay there long either, or I'd storm over and raise a ruckus. I stole my in-law's grain, and when drunk, I'd get physical with my father-in-law. I was nothing but a beast. At the thought, I raised my hand and gave myself several hard slaps across the face. I beat her until her lip bled and her face swelled. Song Yakin just watched indifferently, her eyes full of mockery. I knew what she was thinking. Here we go again, all for show, and in a few days he'd be back to his old self. Every time she wanted a divorce, I'd pick up the butcher knife and corner the two of them. "If you dare to die, I'll send your parents to the grave and sell the child." Those words nailed her to the ground. From then on, she lived like a walking corpse. But I knew I couldn't be a beast in this life. "I'm sorry, wife, I'm a beast. It's all my fault. No more drinking, no more gambling. I'll live right, bring our daughter back. I swear, I'll make you and our daughter enjoy a good life." With that, I turned over and climbed off the calm, grabbed the last few pounds of grain, put on my dog fur hat and torn cotton coat, and pushed open the door to leave. Behind me, Song Yakin still wore that numb expression. She knew this guy was going to take the grain to trade for money and gamble again. This life was truly over. I didn't look back, but I was clear in my heart. I went out to try my luck. I couldn't let them go hungry again. First, I went to Uncle Wong's at the west end of the village to borrow a fish trap and a dip net. When Uncle Wong handed them to me, he opened his mouth as if to say something, then swallowed the words back. He knew he couldn't talk me out of it, so he just sighed. As I was heading back with the fish trap, I saw Song Yakin quietly slip out of the house and head toward the west end of the village. I knew she was going to pick up Nyonyo. While I was away, she was bringing our daughter back to stay the night, and would send her back before dawn. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by someone, aching terribly. I ran home, shut the door, and started making bird-catching tools. My father used to be a hunter, and I grew up soaking in it. Those skills were etched into my bones. I twisted wire into a slingshot, bound branches into a bird trap, my hands red from the cold, my knuckles stiff. As I blew warm breath on my hands, I thought I used to be my parents' pride, the fine young man the villagers praised. But just because I had a daughter, I've turned myself into a beast. In this life, I'm going to make something of myself. I can't let the people who care about me down again. Outside the window, snow fell heavily. I gripped the tool in my hand, pushed open the door, and walked into the wind and snow. The barren mountain behind the village was covered in thick snow, and the wind at over 30 degrees below zero cut my face like a knife. I carried that bag of grain on my back, my steps heavy. This bag of grain was brought back by Song Yakin from her parents' home, barely enough for the winter. But I knew there was too little grain, and I had to find a way. I would use it to lure birds. Sparrows, pheasants. starving mad in winter, would dive into the trap at the sight of grain. I took a look around and set up the trap beside the traces left by birds and pheasants. I scattered the grain and covered the trap opening with branches and leaves. Everything camouflaged. Then I found a snow hollow, lay down inside, and waited. At that moment, something suddenly appeared in my mind. Wind direction, animal tracks, temperature changes. This information poured in like flowing water. I could predict which way the birds flying overhead would turn. I was stunned, then overjoyed. This entire mountain was under my control. I rubbed my hands together, picked up the pickaxe, and rushed to the frozen creek to start chipping ice. The ice layer was as thick as an iron plate. One strike sent ice chips flying and jarred my hand numb. I spat into my palm, rubbed my hands together, and gripped the pickaxe handle. Hey, in 10 minutes, I'd smashed out an ice hole. I dropped the dip net in and tied the rope to a nearby bush branch. Then I dashed into the woods. Following the foreknowledge in my head, I found an old poplar tree. I climbed up quickly, reached into the nest, and pulled out a handful of pine siskin eggs. 7 or 8 of them, round and cold. In the dead of winter, only pine siskins still lay eggs. I tucked them into my jacket, and finally a smile crept onto my face. That evening I'd boil them for Nyonyo to build up her strength. After climbing down, I went back to check the traps. Nothing. I scattered another handful of sorghum, then returned to the ice. The moment I pulled up the dip net, my heart leaped into my throat. In the net were 2 wild crucian carp the size of my palm, glinting silver, plus a small handful of river shrimp, still jumping and flapping. I took out the tin cup I carried with me, tipped the fish and shrimp into it, sealed the lid, and wound the rope around it a few times before hanging it from my waist. My face was red from the cold, but I pulled up a faint smile. A good catch. I checked the traps again, still nothing. Sparrows and pheasants are mostly active at night, so I'd have to come back in the middle of the night. Holding my enamel mug and tucking the pine sparrow eggs in my pocket, I headed home. It was already dark. When I pushed open the door, Song Yakin was sitting on the edge of the Kong with Nyonyo. The little girl was 4 or 5 years old, with big eyes like black grapes, timidly taking in this home. She hadn't been back for half a year to her. This place was even stranger than her grandmother's house. Mom, where's Dad? What do you want him for? You'll sleep with Mom tonight, and I'll take you back to Grandma's first thing tomorrow morning. After saying this, Song Yakin turned and looked around the room, searching through the cabinets. I could see there wasn't a bite to eat in the house. She set her eyes on the worn sack by the door, the one with the leftover sorghum grain I hadn't finished scattering. But she didn't say a word. After a moment of silence, she said to Nyonyo, "Be good, Nyonyo. Wait in the room for a while. Mom's going out to borrow a few potatoes, and I'll come back and bake them for you." She threw on her cotton padded jacket and pushed open the door to leave. I watched Nyonyo sitting on the edge of the Kong, her 2 small hands propping herself up on the edge, not daring to sit further in. That was her own home, yet she didn't even dare to climb onto the Kong. I crouched down and said softly, "Nyonyo, it's Daddy." She glanced at me, tucked in her neck, and said nothing. My heart felt like it was being sawed with a dull knife. Song Yakin walked over to the door of Hu Xiujuan's house next door. Hu Xiujuan was her childhood friend from their hometown. The two had grown up together. Xiujuan's father worked in the kitchen of a state-run restaurant, and back then Song Yakin often helped Xiujuan out. But now, Xiujuan had married a man from the forest farm, and her life was doing well. She'd even given birth to a bouncing baby boy. As for Song Yakin, she'd married me. I watched through the crack in the window. Hu Xiujuan opened the door and came out, her hair a mess, her face still flushed, and the buttons on her padded jacket not even fastened properly. "Yakin, why are you here?" "Xiujuan, can I borrow 2 potatoes? 2 will do. Ali's not around, and I brought Nyonyo back home. There's no food in the house." The bit of courtesy on Hu Xiujuan's face vanished at once. "Yakin, our family doesn't have much grain left either. You've already borrowed half a caddy of coarse corn grits and a small sack of sorghum rice from my house this month, and you still haven't returned them. I know you looked after me in the past, but since you married over here, the favors are just about paid back. With your husband in that state, who would dare lend you anything? Don't blame me for being blunt. A woman marries a man for food and clothing. Your man is done for in this life. You can't drag other people down with you." Song Yakin lowered her head. Her lips quivered twice. 2 potatoes, just 2. Nyonyo hasn't eaten all day. Hu Xiujuan sighed, as if shooing away a beggar. "Fine, just 2. Don't let it happen again." She turned and went back inside, brought out 2 small potatoes, stuffed them into her hand, and closed the door. Song Yakin clutched the 2 potatoes and stood in the snow, dazed for a long while. The cold wind poured into her collar. She hunched her shoulders and walked back with her head lowered. I turned away and wiped my face. Wiped the tears away. Chapter 4. Admitting fault. When she pushed the door open, I was standing by the stove. She placed the potatoes on the stove, not looking at me, and said, "You're back." Her voice was dry, devoid of emotion. The grain? It hasn't been touched. It's at the door." She froze for a moment, then turned to look at me. She saw the bag of grain still at the door, still sealed. Something flickered in her eyes, then quickly died out. "Lost your bet? Lost it all? I didn't gamble." She didn't believe him. She snorted, started a fire to boil water, and threw 2 potatoes into the ashes. The room was so quiet that only the crackling of the firewood could be heard. Nuno huddled in the corner of the Kong, stealing glances at me. I walked over and crouched down in front of her. "Nuno, Daddy is sorry." The little girl blinked and shrank back a little. I reached out to touch her head, but she flinched again. Song Yakin didn't turn around, saying with her back to me, "Don't give me that." "What about the grain? You sold it, didn't you?" "No, I didn't." "Then what are you going to do?" "I made some snares and set them on the mountain, and I also cut a hole in the ice. I caught 2 fish, a handful of shrimp, and found a few wild bird eggs." She turned around and stared at me for several seconds, as if trying to recognize something. What's gotten into you now?" "Nothing's gotten into me." I stood up and looked into her eyes. "Yakin, starting today, I will never touch alcohol again, and I will never gamble again. If I do, you can take a knife and chop off my hand." She was stunned. For a long moment, her lips moved, but no words came out. Then she turned around and went back to tending the fire. But I saw her shoulders trembling. I took the wild bird eggs from my chest and set them on the stove ledge. "Boil these eggs for Nuno to eat. I'll stew the fish for soup and stir-fry the shrimp." She didn't speak, just nodded. I cleaned the fish, put water in the pot, and dropped the fish in. There was no oil or salt in the house, so it was just plain boiled. But when the natural freshness of the fish wafted out, Nuno sniffed. "Mom, it smells so good." Song Yakin shelled a boiled wild bird egg and handed one to her. "Eat slowly, it's hot." Nuno took it, took a bite. Her eyes lit up and took another bite. She stole a glance at me, then ate in small bites. I sat on the threshold, watching the 2 of them huddled around the stove. The firelight painted their faces. At that moment, my heart was churning. In my past life, how the hell could I ever have raised my hand to them? What the hell am I? Song Yakin ladled a bowl of fish soup and handed it to me without a word. I took it and took a sip. The soup was very light, no salt, but it burned my throat with its heat. I lowered my head and finished it. Then I stood up and put on my dogskin hat. "I'm going to check the traps. The birds should be caught by midnight." She didn't stop me. Before I pushed the door open, I looked back. Nuno was holding the egg and whispered, "Mom, Dad isn't hitting anyone today." Song Yakin pulled her into her arms and didn't answer. The door closed. I stood in the snow, fists clenched tight. In this life, I owe them. I'll repay them with a lifetime. Chapter 5. Setting traps. At midnight, the snow fell even harder. I stumbled through the deep snow toward the barren mountain, the flashlight beam casting a dim yellow glow across the snow. There was indeed movement at the trap. A pheasant had its foot caught, flapping wildly, sending snow flying with its wings. 2 sparrows hung on the bird trap, already motionless. I hurried over, pinned down the pheasant, and wrung its neck. The warm blood spilled onto the snow, steaming. I also put the 2 sparrows into the cloth bag. I crouched in the snow. I reset the trap and scattered a handful of sorghum. Looking up at the sky, it was gray and overcast. Snowflakes stung my face. But I wasn't cold at all. My heart was warm. I carried the pheasant and sparrows back home. Passing by the creek, I went to check the ice hole again. The scoop net was empty, and a thin layer of ice had formed on the water. I'd chisel it open again tomorrow. When I got home, the light was still on in the house. I pushed the door open and went inside. Song Yakin was sitting on the edge of the Kong, holding Nuno's little hand. Nuno was already asleep. She saw the pheasant in my hand and was startled for a moment. "You actually caught one?" "Yeah, and 2 sparrows too." I put the pheasant on the stove and brushed the snow off my clothes. "I'll clean it tomorrow. One will stew, and the other will salt and save for the new year." Song Yakin stood up, walked over to the stove, and touched the pheasant. Its feathers were still warm. She turned her head to look at me, her eyes red. "You really won't go gamble anymore?" "No." "And the drinking?" "Not a drop." She was silent for a moment, then said softly, "You need to mean what you say." "I swear." She didn't say anything else. She turned and moved Nuno further inside the Kong, then pulled out a quilt for me. "Get on the Kong and sleep. Don't catch cold." I took off my cotton overcoat and laid it over the edge of the Kong. I lay down. The mattress was cold, and the bedding had a faint musty smell. But Nuno's breathing was right beside me, light and soft. Song Yakin lay on my other side, facing away from me. After a long while, she turned over and whispered, "If you can really change, this family can still work." I didn't speak, burying my face in the quilt. My tears burned the pillow. Chapter 6. Daybreak. Early the next morning, I got up to deal with the pheasant. I plucked it clean, gutted it, left the organs for the cat, and chopped the meat into pieces. There was no oil in the house. I put the chicken pieces directly into the pot and dry fried them until the skin turned golden, then added water and simmered. Wild chicken meat is tough, so it needs to stew for a while. Song Yakin woke up and sat on the calm, watching the commotion by the stove. Her eyes were still a bit swollen. Nyunyo also woke up, rubbed her eyes, and sat up. Smelling the meat aroma wafting from the pot, she swallowed. "Mom, are you stewing chicken?" "Yes, your dad caught it." "Dad caught it." Nyunyo tilted her head to look at me, her eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of fear. I smiled at her. "Eat more, Nyunyo, so you'll grow tall." She didn't say anything, but the corner of her mouth quietly lifted. I filled a bowl with meat and set it on the Kong table. "Eat up, it's hot." Song Yakin also got up, picked up a piece of chicken leg meat, and put it in Nyunyo's bowl. "Eat slowly." I sat to the side watching them eat. Outside the window, the snow had stopped. The sun peeked out from between the clouds, casting a brilliant white light on the window paper. Song Yakin took a few bites, then suddenly asked me, Are you really planning to settle down and live properly?" "Really?" "Then Nyunyo, can she be brought back?" I looked into her eyes and said, word by word, "Yes. She's coming back today. From today on, Nyunyo lives at home. No one is being sent away." Her chopsticks froze midair, and her eyes reddened again. Nyunyo looked up, still chewing meat, and mumbled, "Dad." My nose stung. I reached out and touched her head. This time, she didn't dodge. I turned to look out the window. My own footprints were imprinted on the snow, stretching from the doorway into the distance. Those footprints were crooked, like the wrong paths I'd taken over the years. But it didn't matter. The new path starting today, it would be trodden solid. I took a deep breath and stood up. "I'll go clean the fish and simmer some fish soup for you tonight." Song Yakin didn't look at me, just kept wiping Nyunyo's mouth with her head lowered. I stood by the stove, the soup in the pot bubbling away. The aroma filled the whole room. I suddenly remembered how Song Yakin had stood frozen in the doorway last night. And then I thought of what Hu Xiujuan had said as she closed the door. This is fate. Refuse to accept it and see where that gets you. All right. In this life, I'll accept fate just this once. I'll resign myself to living well. I'll resign myself to spoiling that mother and child to the skies. I'll resign myself to being a real person. This is fate. If you don't accept it, what else can you do? I see. Then Xiujuan, you go ahead and get busy. I'll go try another household. Rejected. Song Yakin's eyes suddenly dimmed, her face full of embarrassment. She gave an awkward smile and turned to leave. "Don't go borrowing anymore. I'll give you 2 more potatoes, but this is the last time. Nobody owes you anything. It's not that easy to borrow." Hu Xiaowan pursed her lips, said her piece, and turned to head back inside. As soon as she entered the room, the man lying on the bed eagerly grabbed her hand. "Who was it? Was it Sister Yakin from next door again, coming to borrow grain? You should give her a bit more. After all, you two are like sisters. You married into the village together. She's really pitiful. The important thing is the child is innocent and suffering along with her. If we can help, let's help." Wang Zhangwo, lying in the quilts on the Kong, grinned and said, "One look at his face told you he was the earnest, hard-working type of plain, honest soul. He was kind-natured too, and well-liked at the forestry station. But no sooner had he said that than his wife shot him a glare. Why should we help her? Is something owed to her? Or are we in her debt? If her own man can't amount to anything, who's to blame for that? Our grain didn't just fall from the sky. The whole village is holed up for the winter. As if scraping by on this winter supply is so easy. I say, Wang Zhangwo, are you sweet on her pretty face? Trying to win her over with food so you can slip into her bed, are you?" Hu Xiujuan gritted her teeth and grabbed Wang Zhangwo by the ear, looking every bit the fierce shrew. "Ayaya, let go. It hurts like crazy. What are you jabbering on about? What kind of man do you take me for? Don't go spouting that nonsense. If word gets around, I'll have no face left." Wang Zhangwo shoved his wife's hand away and crawled back under the quilt, grimacing through the pain, deciding to wash his hands of the matter. He'd only thought that since his wife's good friend had fallen to such a sorry state, a little help here and there couldn't hurt. "Put away those little flirtatious thoughts of yours, Wang Zhangwo. Don't be so shameless. Just because you've got some muscle, you think you can make eyes at the village women. If I ever find out you're messing around with some man's wife, I swear I'll cut that thing right off you." Seeing her husband give in, Hu Xiaowan grew even more pleased with herself. Only then did she dig out 2 potatoes from her cellar and unhurriedly head outside. You see, in the northeastern countryside, winter nights were a whole different story. In the daytime, even at -20 degrees, you could at least see the sun and get a little bit of warmth. But once night came, the bone-chilling cold of -37 or 8 could freeze a person to death. Just to borrow 2 potatoes, Song Yakin was shivering all over, her face bright red from the cold, the wind cutting her cheeks like a knife. But hearing the conversation from inside the house, Song Yakin felt a surge of shame well up from the bottom of her heart and returned home in silence. So when Hu Xiujuan came waddling out with the potatoes, but she found the front gate empty of anyone. Fine, don't take it saves me. If you've really got that kind of spine, don't come asking. You still haven't repaid what you borrowed last time. Hu Xiujuan rolled her eyes and muttered a few words, then bolted the big wooden gate. She glanced at the neighboring yard all dark, then went back inside and locked the door. But Song Yakin hadn't gone home at all. She lingered for a while in front of her own house, then ran to Uncle Laugan's firewood pile at the east end of the village and began rummaging through it top and bottom. Because the pile was covered with snow, she had to brush the snow off with her hands. The cold left her fingers stiff and bright red. She knew Uncle Laugan's family planted corn, so the pile was all corn stalks, all meant for burning to heat the house in winter. Now, with no way to borrow grain anywhere and unwilling to let her daughter go hungry, Song Yakin had almost tried every means she could think of. Even though her own stomach was gurgling with hunger, so empty it felt like her chest was stuck to her back, she kept on searching the woodpile for anything edible. Finally, she found a black, lumpy thing on the joint of one of the corn stalks in the firewood pile. This stuff is called humine in the Northeast. It's caused by a fungus known as corn smut. When this fungus infects corn, it forms black or grayish-white galls on the ears, looking like black tumors. But in fact, it can be used as both food and medicine. Holding up a lump of humine, Song Yakin finally showed a stiff smile, and as she looked at it, she began to cry. It was just then that a noise came from Uncle Laugan's house, startling her so much that she turned and ran, heading straight home. Once she got back, she first lit the firewood to warm up the room, then took out some of the humine she had found in the firewood pile and put it into water to boil. Soon the water turned black. Then she put the rest into a shabby red rooster bowl and carried the whole bowl, both the solid and the liquid, into the room, setting it on the table. Obedient little Nyonyo, seeing the steaming hot food, thought her mother had brought up a bowl of coarse corn porridge after all. At Grandma's house, they had always eaten coarse grain porridge like that. But when she saw her mother serve 2 bowls of black and murky stuff, Nyonyo pouted and asked, "Mom, what is this?" A trace of helplessness flickered across Song Yakin's face. She sighed and said, "Nyonyo, it's already pitch dark outside, and Mama couldn't find anything to eat. Just make do and eat this stuff for now, it's really tasty. If you don't believe me, look." With that, Song Yakin picked up the bowl and drank the dark, black mush inside. This stuff was powdery to begin with, and after being boiled it still didn't set. Drinking it was just like drinking plant ash. There was no taste at all, but the inside of her mouth and her teeth had turned black. Seeing that, Nyonyo rubbed her hungry little belly, picked up the other bowl, and scooped out the black paste with her hand to eat. As soon as she took a bite, her mouth was full of tears. Seeing her daughter suffer alongside her, Song Yakin covered her face, tears streaming down. Her heart ached beyond words. But what else could she do? The mother and daughter made do with a simple dinner, then spread out the quilts early and lay on the heated brick bed. At least the bed was still warm, that gave them a sliver of comfort. Holding her daughter in her arms, Song Yakin blew out the oil lamp, but she couldn't fall asleep. When would a life like this ever end? She truly had no extravagant hopes. Even if they could only manage 1 full meal a day, so long as her daughter could stay home, she would already feel utterly content. But even such a simple wish, her husband Chun Lu wouldn't grant her. The more she thought, the more desperate she became. She could even hear her daughter's stomach rumbling in her sleep. She herself was so weak from hunger that she could only tighten her belt, not daring to take off her clothes to lie down and sleep. Once asleep, she'd be fine. Once asleep, she wouldn't have to think about anything. And by now, the sky had fallen completely dark. It was already past 8 in the evening in the countryside. Everyone would have put out the lights and gone to bed long ago. But Chun Lu had just walked into the village from outside, his whole body covered in ice crystals. His eyelashes had turned white, and even his dog fur hat was frosted. The walk back had taken over an hour, and as soon as he entered the village, he headed straight for Uncle Wang's house. Uncle Wang's house had long been dark, everyone asleep. But Chun Lu vaulted over into the yard, casually set the scoop net by the window, and lightly tapped on the glass. "Uncle Wang, you asleep yet?" Chun Lu called softly. From inside came the sound of movement. Which bastard is it? Not sleeping at this hour, climbing up to my window. Isn't that wicked? The curses came first from inside. Then Chun Lu saw the kerosene lamp light up. Uncle Wong, it's me, Chun Lu. I just got back and put the scoop net by the window for you. Come out for a second, I've brought you something good. Chun Lu said with a grin. Although he didn't manage to hit a pheasant this time, at least he had gained something. Since he borrowed a landing net from the neighbor's house and caught a few crucian carp, he had to leave one as thanks. This was also a hunter's rule. Though he wasn't a true hunter, his father had taught him these rules since childhood, and some rules couldn't be broken. You little brat, you scared me to death. After hearing Chun Li's voice, Uncle Wong cursed again, then came out holding up an oil lamp and wearing a cotton-padded jacket draped over his shoulders. Uncle Wong shivered from the cold, raised the kerosene lamp and shone it in front of Chun Lu. Chun Lu also took out a crucian carp and waved it in front of Uncle Wong. I borrowed your landing net, caught a few grass carp, and thought I'd bring one over for your family. Don't mind it being so little, Uncle Wong. When I come back from the mountain tomorrow, if I shoot a pheasant, I'll be sure to bring you 2 big drumsticks. As Chun Lu spoke, he already handed over the crucian carp. Uncle Wong, who had been about to curse him out a moment ago, as soon as he saw the crucian carp, his eyes lit up. On such a cold day, let alone whether he could catch any fish, even if he did manage to catch one, it would take a huge amount of effort. You'd have to chisel a hole in the ice, then lower the net down and stay there watching. In this freezing weather, staying outside for more than 3 hours could easily freeze a person. I didn't think that this Chun Lu kid could actually last 4 or 5 hours outside and really manage to catch a fish. You're just showing off, relying on your youth and hot blood. You'd even dare to wait outside in such cold weather. If your dad finds out, he won't hesitate to break your legs. I'll take this fish. At least you've got some conscience. But you have to fix that rotten gambling habit of yours. It's already so late. Get on home now. Old Wong took the crucian carp with a beaming smile. It had been a long time since he'd had any meat or fish. Good thing there was still some lard at home to mix into rice. But he never expected that Chun Lu, that incorrigible gambler, would actually bring him a fish. What a miracle. Ha ha ha. Hey, Uncle Wong, I know you have some lard at home. Could you give me 2 scoops? Just 2 scoops are enough. I'll take this fish back and stew it. It's got a lot of bones, and I'm afraid they'll get stuck in my daughter's throat. Chun Lu rubbed his hands together and said with a grin. I said, kid, you're not sleeping in the middle of the night, and you come over to bring me fish. Turns out it's for 2 scoops of lard. All right. The sun must be rising from the west today for you to actually think about your daughter. Isn't your daughter staying at your mother-in-law's house? Uncle Wong said that, but still turned and went into the house. In just a moment, he came out carrying a small bottle of white, paste-like lard. Today the kid's mother, Yakin, went to her parents' place and brought the child back. I was thinking of treating the 2 of them to a better meal. I did too many bad things in the past. I owe the mother and child too much. I'm just trying to make up for it now. Many thanks, Uncle Wong. I'll be heading back now. Chun Lu happily took the small bottle of lard. It's not much, but it's enough for 2 meals. Hurry back, stop messing around. At this hour of the night, if it were anyone else, I'd have already lost my temper. Uncle Wong waved his hand impatiently, turned around, and went back into the house, closing the door tightly behind him. Chun Lu climbed back over the wall, holding the lard in his hand. He hurried home under the moonlight. Song Yakin, who had just fallen asleep, suddenly heard someone tugging at the door. Startled, she turned over and sat up in bed. She immediately hugged her daughter Nyonyo, who had also woken up, tightly in her arms, trembling all over. Who is it? Song Yakin's voice was shaking. She was clearly terrified. Someone pulling at the door in the dead of night. How could she not be scared out of her wits? It was just the 2 of them at home. If some shameless man from the village came to cause trouble or take advantage, she wouldn't know what to do. Wife, it's me. Open the door. I'm freezing to death. Chun Lu called out urgently from outside. But upon hearing that it was Chun Lu, Song Yakin became even more frightened. Like a frightened bird, she hugged her daughter and huddled at the edge of the Kong against the wall. Mom, why don't you send me back to Grandma's house? Is he going to hit me? Little Nyonyo knew the unfamiliar father was back, and in fright snuggled into her mother's arms, tilting her small head to ask pitifully. It's okay, Mom's here. I won't let him hit you. Song Yakin hugged her daughter and showed no intention of going to open the door. Chun Lu also heard the commotion inside and knew his daughter had been brought back. But he also realized what the situation inside must be like. Mother and daughter were probably terrified of him already. At that thought, Chun Li's guilt grew overwhelming, and the hand gripping the door lost its strength. So he simply stood at the doorway, his breath fogging in the cold air. When the sounds outside stopped, Song Yakin thought Chun Lu had left. Only then did she slowly put her daughter down on the Kong and get under the quilt herself. But she still felt anxious, afraid that Chun Lu might break the door down and burst in again at any moment. Why was he back so early today? Had he gambled away all his money? That last bag of rations was gone just like that. Sigh. She lay there, not knowing how long had passed, but Song Yakin still couldn't fall asleep. Her daughter, though, had dozed off again. She slowly climbed up from the heated brick bed and picked up the kerosene lamp. After lighting it, she went to the kitchen, because the kitchen and the outer door were one and the same. Pushing open the door led straight to the outer kitchen, and only then came the living quarters. With a nervous heart, Song Yakin carried the kerosene lamp to the wooden door and saw that it was already covered with frost and ice. Clearly, the temperature outside had dropped even further. Are you gone? Are you still there? After standing there for a long while, Song Yakin finally called out tentatively toward the outside. Wife, I'm freezing to death. Please, open the door and let me in, okay? I won't send our daughter back to her grandma's, and I won't scold you. I promise I won't make a fuss. Chen Lu naturally knew exactly what his wife was most worried about. Having already stood outside for a full hour and a half, he didn't dare make any noise that might startle mother and daughter. Chen Lu, who had originally planned to tough it out outside all night, really couldn't hold on any longer. When he heard his wife's movements, he couldn't help but start begging. Hearing that Chen Lu was still outside, Song Yakin was startled, but not opening the door wasn't an option either. What if this guy barged in or froze to death out there? In the end, she would be the one to suffer. Thinking this, Song Yakin walked to the door, gently lifted the latch, and then knelt on the ground. When Chun Lu pulled the door open, he saw Song Yakin kneeling in front of the door, hands clasped together, her face full of pleading. Chun Lu, please, stop making trouble, okay? Nyo just fell asleep. Just let her stay at home for one night. I'll send her back tomorrow. Isn't that good enough? I beg you, have some pity on me. When he saw this, Chun Lu was struck as if by lightning, his scalp tingling all over. His heart ached as if twisted by a knife. A suffocating sensation overwhelmed him, so much so that the moment he opened the door, he stood frozen, not moving a single inch, silently rooted to the spot. How much sin had he committed? How many inhuman things had he done to drive his wife to such a state that merely wanting to bring their daughter home for the night meant she had to kneel and beg? Even though Chun Lu was nearly frozen stiff, he still gritted his teeth, raised his hand, and slapped his own face twice. The agonizing pain from the bone-chilling cold was able to ease the guilt and sense of sin in his heart by a small measure. Only a small measure. Wife, please get up first, okay? It's so cold, you're freezing. I won't go inside. I'll just wait at the door. You go back and hold our daughter to sleep, all right? When he said this, Chun Lu took 2 steps back with deep guilt. Then he reached out and pushed the door. At that instant, Chun Lu and Song Yakin locked eyes for a second, as if the whole world had fallen silent. In Song Yakin's sight, outside was a frozen wasteland. Chun Li's nose and mouth were already covered with white frost. The rubber hat on his head was also pale white, no longer giving off any warm breath. The moment the door closed, Song Yakin felt the panic in her heart ease a little. She climbed up from the ground, her knees aching with cold. Song Yakin stood by the door for a moment, peering out through the window. She saw Chun Lu crouching beside the wooden fence, head lowered, holding a metal mug in both hands. His face was hidden from view. For some reason, an inexplicable feeling suddenly welled up in Song Yakin's heart, and she found Chun Lu rather pitiful. In this freezing weather, if he stayed outside all night, he would definitely be frozen stiff. If anything happened to him from the cold, the rest of her life would truly be over. But after being soft-hearted so many times, what had it gotten her? Hurt again and again, torment that only grew worse. This man, could he still be trusted? As for Chun Lu, all that filled his mind were the regrets of his previous life. He still couldn't forget the look in his wife's eyes as she faced death in that lifetime. She had only wanted a hug before dying, just that, yet even at death her wish went unfulfilled, cruelly rejected by Chun Lu. After who knows how long, heavy snow began to fall from the sky again. Chun Lu felt as if he was about to lose consciousness entirely. The sky was still dark, and he inwardly wished the sun would come out soon to provide some relief. Otherwise, he was afraid he would freeze to death outside tonight, and he didn't dare hope that Song Yakin would feel sorry for him. Because even he himself knew that he didn't deserve forgiveness. The sins he had committed were too grave. Creak. Just as Chun Lu, frozen to the bone, seemed to see his great-grandmother, the door to his own house was pushed open. But no one appeared. Only a very indifferent voice came through. Hurry up and get inside. Stop putting on an act out there. After saying this, Song Yakin turned and went back into the house. She didn't dare actually leave Chen Lu outside in the cold. Otherwise, if he got desperate, the night would probably be anything but peaceful. Hearing this, Chen Li's eyes lit up. He lifted his stiff legs and stumbled toward the house. He even closed the door bit by bit, hooking the door panel with his frozen fingers. Though there wasn't much warmth in the kitchen, it was still far better than outside a temperature difference like night and day. Chen Lu sat on the stove, soaking up the last bit of residual warmth. It took a full half an hour before his legs and feet began to warm up, and they itched unbearably clearly. They had gotten frostbite. Once he had warmed up a bit, he didn't bother with it. Glancing at the tightly shut door, he didn't go inside. Instead, he turned around, picked up a few pieces of firewood from the base of the wall, and stuffed them all into the stove pit. Whoosh! He took out half a box of matches, struck one, and a flame burst out. Chen Lu then picked up a stick of fat wood, lit it, and gently tucked it beneath the firewood. He also grabbed a few dried corn husks and laid them on top to catch the flame. In the Northeast, pine resin is commonly called songmingzi fatwood. Fatwood forms after a pine tree dies, and over time, the resin inside undergoes prolonged natural aging and decay, merging with the wood itself into a distinct substance. It is different from amber, which is a fossil formed from the resin of ancient coniferous plants over geological ages. That's why fatwood burns for a long time and is not easily extinguished. It was best used for starting a fire. Chen Lu carefully ignited the wood, and the flames in the fire pit gradually grew stronger. When he turned around to lift the pot lid, he nearly knocked over a bowl beside him. When he picked up the bowl and looked closely, he found it was pitch black inside. Bringing it to his nose, the familiar yet strange smell made his eyes widen. It was corn smut, a kind of spore-like growth that appears on corn in the Northeast. People occasionally used it to stave off hunger, but it was far from enough to truly fill one's stomach. Even in this time of scarcity, it was something even pigs wouldn't eat, yet. In an instant, Chen Li's heart was flooded with despair and guilt, as if a sharp knife were ruthlessly twisting in his chest. He knelt on the ground, covering his mouth, tears silently streaming down his face, painful sobs caught in his throat. In his heart, he kept cursing himself. Useless, a beast. There was no grain left in the house, so his wife and daughter could only eat this kind of thing for dinner. All of this was because of him. His rotten gambling had drained away every last bit of the family's savings. They had already borrowed from every neighbor they could, and their reputation had been ruined by his actions. No one was willing to lend them money or food anymore. His wife not only had to bear the hardships of life, but also endure the pointed remarks from outsiders. She couldn't even get a single proper meal. As a man, he felt utterly defeated and full of self-blame. However, even though his heart was full of guilt, Chen Lu held back his emotions and began to prepare the little food he had. The finch eggs he had brought back from hunting outside, the fish from the enamel mug, and a handful of small river shrimp. These were all he had managed to get his hands on today. He gently took them out, thawed them, and carefully put them into the pot. The lard he had borrowed from Uncle Zhang was also poured into the hot pot. His movements were gentle, afraid of waking his wife and daughter sleeping in the room. As the lard gradually heated up in the pot, Chen Lu put the washed river shrimp and crucian carp into the pot to fry. Although there were few seasonings at home, just these simple ingredients, after being cooked in hot oil, had already begun to emit an enticing aroma. It was a scent that mixed the fragrance of fish and shrimp, and in this barren era, in this remote northeastern village, such meaty dishes were a rare delicacy. He found the salt jar, poured out the last bit of salt into the pot, then added the wild bird eggs, poured in water, and covered the pot. Chen Lu sat in front of the stove pit, quietly watching the flames lick the bottom of the pot, feeling the faint warmth. The aroma from the pot gradually filled the whole kitchen, forming a sharp contrast with the cold emptiness before. In the room, Song Yakin had not fallen asleep, because she was afraid that Chen Lu, having warmed up, would beat her and drive their daughter out. So she couldn't help but tightly hold her sleeping daughter Nyonyo, her heart full of anxiety. The kitchen kept sending out sounds, and every time she thought about it, Song Yakin's heart gave a violent thump. She was afraid that the next second the door would be yanked open and that demon husband of hers would burst in and start making a huge scene. What on earth was he doing? Could he really have frozen out there and gotten hurt? Why hasn't he come inside even now? How could he possibly listen to her? In the past, when something like this happened, after being locked outside and left to freeze for so long, the first thing he would do once he warmed up was torment her and beat her. It had been a while now. Why still hadn't he come in? It was often the fear of the unknown that made one feel uneasy. The more still and unresponsive Chen Lu was, the more anxious and panicked Song Yakin grew inside. Still, it was almost dawn. She would send her daughter back to her mother's home then, so Chunlu wouldn't cause any more trouble. It was just that her daughter would suffer, missing her but unable to have her by her side. Mommy. Suddenly, her daughter Nyunyo in her arms opened her eyes. The sky outside was already showing signs of dawn. Song Yakin saw her daughter looking at her with curiosity. It's not even dawn yet. Let's sleep a little longer. Only when she saw her daughter could Song Yakin's wounded heart find healing. This was also the only hope and obsession that kept her going. Mommy, can you smell something so yummy? Take a whiff. The little girl wiggled her nose and sniffed the air, just like a little greedy cat. She had been far too tense just now, to the point that even the warm, fragrant aroma permeating the air had completely slipped past Song Yakin's notice. It wasn't until her daughter reminded her that she snapped back to her senses. She smelled the meaty fragrance filling the room, and the heated brick bed was getting hotter and hotter. Song Yakin furrowed her brows, her heart full of confusion. The smell was drifting in from the kitchen. But where did the meat come from? Could Chunlu actually be cooking? How could that be? Ridiculous. Not to mention he didn't know how to cook. Even if he could, there's no way he'd lift a finger himself. And besides, where would real meat even come from? The more she thought about it, the more baffled she became. In the end, Song Yakin simply dropped the thought, closed her eyes, and hugged her daughter, planning to sleep a little longer. But their daughter was already awake, especially after catching that aroma, her little face full of longing. After all, in this era, just being able to fill one's stomach was already quite good. There were times when they might go a whole month without even smelling meat. Whether adult or child, having a meaty meal was not so easy. Even at her maternal home, Nyunyo, who could get food at every meal, wouldn't go hungry. But to have meat, she also had to wait for the right chance. At that moment, Chunlu, busily working in the kitchen, slowly stood up and lifted the pot lid, as a steaming aroma of meat spread out and surged into his nostrils. Even he was starving. After all, before leaving, he had nothing in his stomach, and he had been frozen for so long. Now, looking at the crucian carp and shrimp in the big iron pot, and the fragrance emanating from 7 or 8 pine sparrow eggs, he wished he could bury his head in the pot. Chunlu forced himself to hold back the desire to have a taste first. These foods were prepared for his wife and daughter, to improve their meals and supplement their nutrition. It was also a way to make amends and repay a debt. And so, he put the sorghum rice he had carried back into the pot to steam as well. When the fragrance of the sorghum rice gradually filled the air, he, who was nearly faint from hunger, could no longer resist and scooped a few mouthfuls into his mouth with his bare hands. The sweet, fragrant taste was especially tantalizing when one was starving, and filling his stomach became his only thought. Seeing that the soup in the pot had already begun to bubble and the fish and shrimp were thoroughly cooked, Chunlu hastily fetched 2 large bowls riddled with nicks and chips, then used a homemade wooden spatula to scoop the fish into them. One bowl was filled with the fish and shrimp, while the other was packed with wild bird eggs, along with the thick, rich broth. Just a whiff of it was enough to make one's mouth water. Looking at the 2 steaming bowls of food, a hint of contentment appeared on Chun-Li's face. Carrying the 2 bowls of fragrant dishes, he walked to the door and knocked gently. "Honey, please open the door. I've made fish and shrimp for you and our daughter. It's already dawn, so you two should have a quick bite," Chunlu said in a low voice, careful not to disturb the people inside. He knew very well that this was all the trouble he had caused himself. Now he could only make up for it bit by bit and win back his wife's trust. Inside the room, Song Yakin was taken aback when she heard the voice outside. She hadn't expected Chunlu to actually bring back fish. No wonder her daughter had said she smelled the fragrance of meat last night. Song Yakin had already sat up, draped in a cotton-padded jacket. Inside, she wore a floral sleeveless vest covered in patches. "Mommy, is this real? Is Daddy making fish for us?" Nyunyo tilted her little head up. Her voice held a trace of hope, and she looked very innocent. Even though she had been driven out by her father during her days living at Grandma's house, the little girl's memory held no deep resentment. For her, her parents were the closest people. Even if she had been scolded and hit before, those grievances were quickly forgotten. It was just that, being young, she couldn't understand why her father disliked her so much, and why he was different from other girls' fathers. So as long as she heard her father call her name, she would instinctively want to get close to him and please him, so that he wouldn't dislike her so much. Song Yakin didn't care about a fish. She was worried that this was a gentle trap set by Chunlu, a sugar-coated bullet. This sudden improvement made her uneasy, because she knew her husband had often been like this in the past, and had always ended up contrary to expectations. However, seeing her daughter rubbing her little belly and looking pitiful, She hesitated for a long time before putting on her clothes, slipped on her shoes, and gently opened the door. "Wife, take the dishes quickly. I won't come in. You two eat first, and then bring them out to me when you're done." Chunlu grinned, trying his best to show his gentlest side. Song Yakin didn't know what had gotten into Chunlu, or what other intentions he might have. But thinking that her daughter hadn't eaten last night, she felt guilty. So, suppressing her inner unease, she took the 2 bowls and chopsticks from Chun-Li's hands. Before she could say anything, Chun-Lu actually closed the door of his own accord. Song Yakin was completely stunned. Little Nyonyo had long since been unable to resist, running over from the Kong and standing at its edge. Her eyes darting around, her tiny mouth chewing on her index finger, she stared intently at the 2 bowls. Song Yakin set aside her distracting thoughts, placed the bowls on the table, and pushed them to the edge of her daughter's quilt. "Be good, Nyonyo. Wrap yourself in the quilt quickly, don't catch cold," Song Yakin said softly. Little Nyonyo eagerly leaned over the table, picked up the chopsticks, and picked up a small river shrimp from the bowl. "Mom, you eat first." The first person she thought of was her mother. Her small hand, with somewhat stiff chopstick movements, still tried hard to bring the shrimp to Song Yakin's lips. Song Yakin suddenly smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. Her daughter's concern filled her with warmth, as if the flowers in her heart had instantly bloomed. She opened her mouth and ate the river shrimp her daughter offered, then said softly, "It's delicious, Nyonyo, you eat too." She gently stroked her daughter's little head as she spoke tenderly. In this moment, the love between mother and daughter felt especially warm in the cold room. The mother and daughter sat on the Kong, savoring this rare feast. Nyonyo's little hands kept picking fish, shrimp, and pine sparrow eggs from the bowl, and with every bite came her happy giggles and endless praise. "So good. So tasty. If only we could have this every day." Song Yakin's eyes gradually dimmed at her daughter's words. Good things never last. These past few days, they had gone hungry for so long, and suddenly being able to eat such a lavish meal made even her feel as though she were hallucinating, as if life was truly meant to be this beautiful. However, reality quickly brought her back down to earth. Daybreak meant she might have to send her daughter back to her grandma's house again. As for why Chun-Lu was acting so strangely today, she couldn't guess, nor did she dare to think further. Her daughter's innocence made Song Yakin's heart ache. Nyonyo's wish to have meat every day in Song Yakin's eyes was nothing but an unattainable luxury. She looked at the half-eaten fish and 2 sparrow eggs left in the bowl and asked softly, "Nyonyo, why aren't you eating anymore?" At this moment, Nyonyo's eyes were fixed on the half-fish and the 2 remaining sparrow eggs in the bowl, and she licked her little lips. Although her heart was full of reluctance, she still said with a smile, "I'm saving them for Daddy." Her voice carried a hint of childish determination, as if this was the only thing she could do for her father, or rather, an instinct. When Chun-Lu outside the door heard these words, he was wolfing down sorghum rice. Originally, this coarse grain was hard to swallow, but when he heard his daughter's sweet, well-behaved words from inside the room, he instantly burst into tears. Sorghum rice caught in his throat, making his eyes bulge. He wiped his tears with his big hand. Thinking of all the abuse and scolding he had inflicted on his daughter in his previous life, Chun-Lu truly wished he could slap himself a few more times. At this moment, he deeply realized how serious his past mistakes were. Just then, Song Yakin handed him the bowl. The moment Chun-Lu took it, Song Yakin seemed to want to say something, but hesitated. Chun-Lu instantly understood his wife's concern and hastily spoke first. "Don't send our daughter back. I'll catch up on sleep in a while, then take a walk in the mountains, and try to bring back some meat for you two by tonight." After a brief hesitation, Chun-Lu spoke again. "I know you don't trust me. You have every right not to believe me, but wife, from now on, don't refuse any kindness I show you and our daughter. Just think of it as me atoning for the wrongs I've done." With that, Chun-Lu took the bowl and walked over to the stove, and wolfed down his food, tears streaming as he ate. Song Yakin watched from the side, her emotions in turmoil. She didn't know how long Chun-Lu could keep up this act this time. She had no idea when he would reveal his true colors again. Letting out a sigh, Song Yakin still closed the door, her heart filled with mixed emotions. As for Chun-Lu, after eating his fill, he washed all the bowls and chopsticks, put them away neatly, then leaned against the pile of firewood in the corner and lay down, falling asleep in an instant. As for going out to catch wild chickens at night, he had completely forgotten about it, because he was just too sleepy. He didn't know how long he had slept, only feeling a tickle at his nose, and then Chun-Lu slowly opened his eyes. What came into view was an adorable little face, holding a straw stick in her hand, puffing out her tiny mouth and mumbling something. Nyonyo. It was actually this little one, who had taken advantage of his sleep to come over and tease him. Are you daddy? Little Nyonyo tilted her head, her face full of curiosity. Because the father in her memory had already become very vague, she only felt that Chenlu looked somewhat familiar. So she instinctively wanted to get close. Of course I'm daddy. Did you miss daddy? Was the fish good last night? Seeing his daughter again, and as a little girl, Chun-Li's heart nearly melted, especially when he remembered that in his previous life, he had been immensely wealthy, with vast assets, yet his daughter had cut off all ties with him. They were estranged forever, and she hated him to the bone. It was precisely because she had lacked fatherly love as a child, and because her mother endured a lifetime of suffering, fell seriously ill, and ultimately passed away in sorrow. This also made Nyonyo lose the person who loved her most in the world. Whenever he thought of this, Chun-Li's heart felt as if pierced by needles, recalling how in his previous life he had rushed frantically to the hospital but didn't even get to see Yakin one last time. That was his lifelong regret, yet he could still vaguely remember the resentful look in his daughter's eyes. Chun-Li couldn't contain his emotions, wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, and reached out to hug his daughter. But at that moment, Song Yakin, who had gone out to the restroom while Chun-Li was asleep, pushed the door open and walked back in. When she saw the instant Chun-Li reached out toward their daughter, she was terrified and rushed over in a few quick strides, scooping Nyonyo up before anything could happen. Didn't mommy tell you not to come out? Why won't you listen? Come back inside with me now. Song Yakin carried her daughter and hurried into the house, her heart thumping wildly. If she had come back even one step later, she didn't dare imagine what might have happened next. Chun-Li had already lost his humanity, beyond all saving. Even if he suddenly changed his ways and treated her and her daughter a little better, Song Yakin knew all too well that it was only temporary. It wouldn't take long, not even 3 days, before his true colors came out. Most importantly, Chun-Li had a track record. Once, when he was losing and red-eyed from gambling, he had even tried to sell their daughter to an old, childless couple. After learning of this, Song Yakin knelt on the ground and begged desperately, wailing and crying to the heavens, only to be beaten and sent rolling across the dirt, utterly miserable. In the end, she had to borrow money from her natal family to pay off the gambling debts before she could bring her daughter back. Ever since then, Song Yakin never dared to let her daughter be alone with Chun-Li. This was also one of the reasons for sending the daughter to be fostered at her maternal grandparents' home. Chun-Li stood there with his hands still hovering in midair, watching helplessly as Song Yakin whisked their daughter inside, as if guarding against a kidnapper. Only then did he remember all the wicked things he had done in his previous life. No wonder his wife had always been on guard against him. Seeing that it was getting late, Chun-Li knew that if he stayed at home, the mother and daughter would feel ill at ease. So he slowly stood up from the firewood pile. He first walked to the door and gave it a gentle knock. Inside the room, Song Yakin, who was dressing Nyonyo, wiped her tears away, her heart filled with reluctance. I know. I'll send Nyonyo back right now. No need for you to rush me. Song Yakin mustered her courage and shouted toward the door. Even if it meant getting beaten, she had to say these words. She was clearly his own daughter, yet she had to be sent to her mother's home to be raised. What kind of father does that? They were his own flesh and blood. How did having a daughter turn her into a money-losing burden? Chun-Li, hearing this from outside the door, knew his wife had misunderstood him and hurriedly explained, Honey, that's not what I meant. I wanted to tell you that I need to go out for a bit. Don't take Nyonyo back, she's already home with us. Don't worry, I'll go out right now and get us something to eat. I promise you two won't go hungry. After leaving these words, Chun-Li sighed. In the end, he didn't push the door open to say this face to face. Instead, he opened the outer door and left the house, feeling the icy, snowy air rush toward him, his groggy, just woken mind gradually clearing. Meanwhile, Song Yakin, still inside dressing Nyonyo, suddenly stopped what she was doing, at first thinking she must have misheard. Mommy, that man who looked like Daddy said I can stay home and don't have to go back to Grandma's. So can I sleep with you again tonight? Nyonyo stared at her mother with longing, hopeful eyes and asked. At that moment, Song Yakin's heart began to waver too. How could she bear to send her daughter back? It was all because Chun-Li had pushed her to this. Yet just now, Chun-Li had given her hope again, agreeing to let their daughter stay. But thinking about it, that man was so unpredictable. And now he had gone out again. Who knew if he'd run off somewhere to drink or gamble? If he lost, he'd be in a bad mood, and he'd definitely have drunk a lot and come back reeking of alcohol. Then when he saw their daughter at home, his temper would flare up, and he'd probably turn the house upside down. How could he possibly remember what he said while sober? At the thought of this, Song Yakin's heart felt as if it were pierced by needles, and she wiped her tears in grievance. Nyonyo, be good. Go to Grandma's house for now. In a couple of days, Mom will come and bring you back." Hearing her mother's words, the expectation on Nyonyo's face instantly turned to disappointment. Still unwilling, she reached out her little hands and hugged her mother's neck, and the mother and daughter sat on the heated brick bed, crying. Meanwhile, outside, Chunlu blew a breath into his hands, thinking that today, no matter what, he had to bag a wild pheasant to give his wife and daughter a proper good meal. With memories from his previous life, although he wasn't as professional and experienced a hunter as his father, he was still far better than ordinary people. However, he didn't have a suitable weapon at hand right now. If only he could get a hunting rifle. But given his current reputation, even though he knew several families in the village had hunting rifles, there was no way he could borrow one. Unless he traded something for it, but he was so poor he couldn't even afford food. So what could he use to trade? Fortunately, he had made some traps and snares. And after a full night, there should be some catch. Today he could also catch some fish and check the bird nests on the old mountain. So he definitely wouldn't go hungry. But Chunlu still wanted to do something big. With his precognitive ability, he could easily find traces of those pheasants. Just thinking about it made Chunlu restless with excitement. And he came once again to Uncle Wang's front door. Since it was already daylight, the door wasn't locked, so he pushed it open and walked straight in. The fire in the kitchen was still burning. Hot water was simmering in the pot, clearly showing they had caught old Uncle Wang's family at breakfast. Old Uncle Wang was home. Chunlu pushed open the door and walked in, only to see Uncle Wang sitting sideways on the edge of the kong, eating. In his hand was a dark, rough cornmeal bun, and he was drinking wild vegetable soup, which also contained the crucian carp Chunlu had brought back yesterday. An old woman in a red headscarf ate with relish, smacking her lips all the while. When he saw Chunlu, old Uncle Wang grinned and patted the edge of the kong, saying, "You little rascal, coming so early you're here to mooch a meal, aren't you? Come, sit down and have a bite. That fish you brought over last night, your aunt used it to make broth this morning." At this moment, Chunlu was indeed hungry, for without enough energy, how could he chase after pheasants? Especially seeing them eating breakfast, his stomach began to growl. "Little Ale, don't be so polite. Since your uncle says sit down and eat, just sit down and eat. I steamed plenty of cornmeal buns this morning. I'll go fetch you a bowl." Aunt Wang was a warm-hearted person. As she spoke, she enthusiastically prepared to get off the kong. Seeing this, Chunlu quickly stepped forward, reached out, and pushed her back. "Aunt Wang, don't get up. I'll get it myself." Chunlu grinned, then walked familiarly to the dish rack and pulled open the wooden door. Back in those days in the Northeast, every household had a wooden dish rack. It was practical, waterproof, and resistant to the cold. The only downside was that it wasn't very attractive, since it had no lacquer. Over time, it would turn black. But Chunlu didn't mind at all. He took out a big rooster-pattern bowl and a pair of wooden chopsticks, then ran back over. He first took the corn bun Aunt Wang handed him, then used a ladle to fill a bowl of soup for himself, and began eating heartily. Uncle Wang and Aunt Wang, watching from the side, couldn't stop smiling. "Little Ale, you're quite capable, just like your father. Your dad is a famous mountain hunter in all these villages, carrying a hunting rifle. He'd even dare to take on a black bear. Those lads in the village have gone into the mountains several times, even chopped ice holes in the nearby reservoir, and still didn't catch many fish. You, though, brought back 2 on your own. That's really something. Are you planning to head into the mountains today?" Uncle Wang had eaten his fill, casually picked up his pipe, placed it in his mouth, and pressed the tobacco with his hand, then set it over the brazier beside him to toast. The so-called brazier was a clay pot, a big basin shaped from yellow earth and water, just like a wash basin. And once it dried, in winter you could burn wood into charcoal and put it in the brazier for warmth. "Yeah, tell you what, Uncle Wang, last night I was thinking of hunting some pheasants. I set out snares and bait, but these pheasants are way too cunning lately. I crouched there for a good long while last night and didn't see a single shadow. Without a hunting rifle in hand, even if I did spot one, if it didn't run into the trap, I'd only be able to chase it across the snow crust," Chunlu said as he wiped his nose. It was too cold outside once he had something warm to eat. His snot couldn't stop flowing out. As he spoke, his eyes turned to Uncle Wang. Because he knew Uncle Wang definitely had some gear at home, he just never showed it. "There are actually a few families in our village with hunting rifles. Shueju's family, Baoku's family, and Kaiying's family all have them. But if you tried to borrow one, you definitely wouldn't be able to. By the way, I have a bow at home. It's an old item left by your aunt's mother, my mother-in-law, before she passed away. See if you can use it. It even comes with matching iron arrows." Uncle Wang suddenly thought of something. He put on his shoes, got off the bed, and began rummaging through boxes and cabinets. That was a horn bow. My mother said that during the Republic of China period, my grandfather was a militia instructor. He was best at horseback archery. That horn bow was handed down from my grandfather. By our generation, the family had only girls, and no one practiced martial arts or wielded weapons. They even gave it to my sisters for free, but no one wanted it, so I brought it back. Hearing Aunt Wang say this, Chen Lu also became interested, especially when he heard about the horn bow. A flicker of surprise rose in his heart. This was a rare find, and at that moment found it. Old Wang said as he rummaged a cloth bundle out from the bottom of the chest. He opened it carefully, revealing an exquisite horn bow. The bow itself was finely crafted from horn and wood, its string drawn taut and looking very sturdy. Beside it lay a pouch of iron arrows, their heads sharp and shafts perfectly straight. You see, this bow has been well cared for. It may be old, but it should still serve. Old Wang handed it to Chen Lu, a trace of expectation in his eyes. Chen Lu took the horn bow and scrutinized it. He gently tugged at the string, feeling its resilience and strength, and an involuntary sense of awe welled up inside him. Holding the bow in his hand, Chen Lu gave it a light heft. It weighed at least 20 pounds, and the heavy feel made him realize no one without enough strength could ever draw this bow. He tried a light pull on the string. Sure enough, the powerful recoil almost jarred his arm. This horn bow was different from traditional bows and arrows. Chen Lu pondered inwardly. A traditional self-bow is usually made from a single piece of wood, and though simple to craft, its power and range are limited. Greater draw weight. The horn bow required much more force, typically needing 50 to 70 pounds of strength to draw fully. Although he couldn't pull it all the way to a full moon now, that didn't stop him from using it. Longer range. Because the composite bow had better elasticity, it could store more energy, giving arrows a faster initial velocity and a farther reach. This meant that when hunting, Chen Lu could strike his target from a safer distance. He knew that from now on, most of his hunting would be done with a bow, unless he could get his hands on a good firearm. Otherwise, he'd be better off using this composite bow. Hunting could be divided into gun hunting and bow hunting. And of course, there was also the even more savage and blood-rousing knife hunting. In Chun Li's view, gun hunting was like catching fish with a net, while bow hunting was like fishing with a rod. Both required skill, but there was no doubt the latter was more challenging. Yet he had no leisure to chase thrills. He simply wanted to use this method to improve his family's life, to let his wife and daughter eat meat at every meal. He raised his head, looking at Uncle Wang and Aunt Wang, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you, Uncle Wang, Aunt Wang. This thing is so important to me," Chen Lu said sincerely. "I'll return it to you as soon as I'm done." But old Uncle Wang smiled and shook his head, patting Chen Lu on the shoulder and saying, "If this thing stays in our house, it'll just be gathering dust in a box. Who knows when bugs might get in and chew it up. Your dad was a famous hunter back in the day, and as his son, you've learned his skills. This thing suits you just right. It's just that you're too lazy, boy. This half-sized little mountain of ours connects to the lesser Xing'an Mountains. And once you head deeper in, there's everything you want. For ordinary folks like us, we live off the mountain if we're near the mountain, and off the water if we're near the water. But for old hunters like you who work the hills, that place is a mountain of gold and silver. If you, boy, don't get diligent, nobody can force you. Now that you've come to your senses on your own, that's a good thing. Take this thing, it's yours. Consider it a gift from me." Hearing old Wang's words, Chen Lu nodded heavily, feeling an indescribable warmth in his heart. After eating his fill, just as he picked up the bowl and chopsticks to wash them, Aunt Wang slapped the back of his hand. "A big lad like you, washing dishes? Go do whatever you need to do." With a playful scold, she got up and started clearing the table. Chen Lu grinned wryly and said nothing more. After saying goodbye to Uncle Wang and borrowing another coil of rope, he walked out the door carrying his bow on his back. Now with such a powerful weapon in hand, though he still couldn't draw it to a full moon, as long as it wasn't a wild boar, an ordinary pheasant or a mountain hare would get a bloody hole from that arrow. Hunting wild boars was more troublesome, and it would be hard for one person alone. There's a saying in the Northeast, passed down among hunters: the hardest game to hunt are first the boar, then the bear, then the tiger. The wild boar is the most formidable, followed by the black bear and the tiger last. I remember my father saying the wild boars in pine forests are the most terrifying because they often rub themselves against pine trees that secrete thick, sticky resin. After rolling on the ground and getting covered in mud, it's like wearing armor even a gun might not penetrate. So if he ran into a wild boar now, Chen Lu would absolutely turn around and run. He couldn't act rashly. He'd manage to live a second time, but if he died before giving his wife and daughter a good life, That would truly be a rebirth of greatness, ending in a pathetic death. With a full stomach and renewed strength, his reborn body was as young as ever, sturdy as could be, as if he had endless energy. Half an hour later, Chen Lu arrived at Halfway Mountain. He first went to the spot where he'd set snares and traps the day before, and then saw that 2 bird traps actually had something on them. The 2 sparrows were already frozen stiff, clearly caught sometime last night. The millet scattered on the snow also showed signs of pecking. Without hesitation, Chen Lu took the 2 little things out of the traps and stuffed them directly into the basket on his back, grinning broadly while puffing out hot breath. Finally got some reward tonight. I can roast sparrows for my daughter. Just rinse these things, string them on wooden skewers, and put them directly into the stove pit to roast. Once the feathers are burned off, smear on some farmhouse soybean paste, and the flavor is incredible. Then he picked up the dip net and stuffed it into the ice hole he had cut yesterday. After doing all this, he clapped his hands and was about to head back into the mountains to climb trees and scout out some bird eggs. But just as he took a step, a sudden sharp pain shot through his brain, and then a scene appeared in his mind. A black shadow was hopping around in the snow crust, and in the blink of an eye it burrowed into the snow shell and vanished. Chun Li's heart stirred, and he abruptly turned around, scanning in all directions, then started wandering around the area. At last, he had stumbled onto something good. Soon, he found the traces, exactly the same as the traces shown in his mind. In this rice field by the ridge, one careless step could send him plunging into a snow pit, and it would take a long while to climb back out. But Chun Lu walked over step by step. The snow barely reached just below his knees, and he hadn't stepped through any hollows. He had already taken the composite horned bow off his back, with an arrow nocked, though he hadn't drawn it yet. He didn't know how accurate his aim was now, but he had to try. At least he had followed the old man into the mountains and learned a thing or two. He had seen the old man take down a black bear with his own eyes. Chun Li's heart was already starting to race. From the vision he'd just had, he knew there was a mountain hopper nearby. In the northeast, they call it a mountain hopper, a wild hare. Crunch. Because the weather was so cold, parts of the snow's surface had frozen solid, and every step made a crunching sound. So in hunting, making noise easily startled the prey. But Chen Li didn't care for small game like mountain hoppers. The key was to make them afraid. Once scared, they lost all sense and ran around in a panic. But he still hadn't caught sight of even a shadow of the mountain hopper, so the only option was to lure it out. After coming closer, Chun Lu squatted down on the ground and stayed perfectly still. Those eyes scanned around like radar. Then he packed a snowball, took a bite to hydrate, and tossed it in all directions. Hunting is a test of patience. If you can't outlast your prey, you go home empty-handed. Fortunately, it wasn't long before his snowballs finally paid off. Chun Lu suddenly saw a head in a patch of snow crust. A small dark spot flickered, followed by 2 ears, and then a furry head. It was that gray mountain hare. The moment it appeared, Chun Lu was thrilled. Almost instinctively, he took down his bow and arrows, took a few steps closer, then stopped. This distance was at least 10+ meters away. He couldn't get any closer, because the rabbit was already about to flee. At that instant, he knocked an arrow and drew without hesitation, all in one fluid motion, bending the horned bow into a half-moon shape. The next second, the arrow shot out, but his aim was terrible. It landed directly in the snow crust right next to the hare. Startled, the hare, it fled in a mad panic, as if leaving only 3 footprints in 100 meters. The hare's agility was beyond his imagination, leaving a trail of rapid leaping tracks on the snow, and it was about to vanish over the hillside at any moment. Chun Lu hurried after it, his eyes locked tightly on the rabbit, every step taken with great care, afraid that one careless slip would cost him the very chance before his eyes.